I was trying to think this morning who it was who I saw do this once, and then I realized I wasn't sure whether I'd actually seen somebody do this once or whether it was a story, which kind of raises some issues around the truthiness of it. But nonetheless, it's the preacher who comes out on the Sunday morning during the summer with the newspaper. It was a long time ago. A paper, it's actual paper, and it folds out. Oh yeah, like you guys are acting like you don't know what it is, yeah. But came out with a newspaper at the sermon, opens the paper and says, let's see what's in the news, and then started talking about it. That'd be a frightening thing to do today. But of course, you know, newspaper, now we'd be on my phone or a tablet or something, which is great, and I think that makes a really important point about what the message on a Sunday morning ought to be about, because it ought to connect with what's going on in the world. It should. It has to. Or it isn't really particularly relevant at all, is it? But, you know, here's the thing. I don't know if you read the news today or in the last little while or, say, since the beginning of time. Because it should raise some real questions when we hear what you just heard. Because when did it get to be okay to lie? When did it get to be okay to slander other people publicly, and not always with the truth? Actually, that's kind of an oxymoron there, because you can't slander with the truth, can you? But Stephen Colbert, right? If you don't know Stephen Colbert, well, you probably do now because he's on the Late Show, but he used to have a character that he called Stephen Colbert, which was a very right-wing fundamentalist kind of Republican character. And back in 2006, he says he coined a word. Others say he just made it prominent. Truthiness. And in 2006, he was specifically applying it to George Bush. I bet he wishes he saved it till now. But in fact, he just recently kind of resurrected truthiness, which, by the way, is actually in the dictionary now. But he made it very prominent in the day, and people talked about it and used it a lot. And he just recently kind of resurrected it a little bit when he now has upgraded it to Trumpiness. But the thing about the word truthiness is that the meaning of it is that it's not true. It's something that sounds true, and it's kind of your gut feeling on it, but you have no evidence whatsoever to back that up. So it's not factually true, but it kind of feels and sounds like it is, and so you'll believe it. So pretty much anything that somebody like Donald Trump says. But the thing about it is that it sounds like it and it feels like it, so you'll accept it. Right? There's I forget who it was, just recently published a story about one of the things that the current president of the United States has actually broken a record for amongst presidents in history, is the number of times he's told something that was absolutely false as if it were true. And here's the thing, though. Do you think he knows? Because I'm pretty sure he does most of the time. But see, when did that get to be okay? Because it's not just, don't get me wrong, it's not just him. Politicians do it all the time. And not just politicians. We do it all the time. We do. Somehow it got to be okay. And so did lots of that other stuff that you're seeing in the paper now. Well, it didn't get to be okay, it just got to be common, so we got used to it and it got to be accepted, right? Thieves stealing. All of those things mentioned in Ephesians. In fact, that bit from Ephesians kind of reads a little bit like, almost like a reorganizing of the Ten Commandments, doesn't it? But in this context, it's how often we've not done that. So you read the paper, it's a thing that folds out, or you read the news online, bearing in mind that the news online is sometimes suspect. Because, for instance, if I were to say to you, Lori and I, over breakfast, we always read the news in the morning, and we read from what we think are reputable news sites, and one of those would be CBC, and some of you will go, oh, no, it's not. And I would go, well, at least it's not Fox, and other people might go, but that's the only thing I watch. So we all have different ideas, right? And there's the thing about all of that stuff is that we all kind of have different ways of understanding that. And that's why having that concept of truthiness is such a dangerous thing, because it means you can make your own truth. And that's not true, really. Sometimes it relies also on the credibility of your source. So here, I'm just going to tell you, this is important stuff to know. We have, for centuries even, referred to Paul's letter to the Ephesians. And here's a thing, it's not actually by Paul. In the last even since the middle of the 18th century even, people started to question whether this was actually by Paul. Because it doesn't match, first of all, it doesn't match any of his sort of characteristic style, really. And it says things that Paul wouldn't have said. By the way, playing to the room, by the way, one of those is that wives should subject themselves to their husband and do as they're told. Paul would never have said that. We used to think he would have because it was in this letter and it's by Paul, but it's not actually. There's other reasons why biblical scholars, since the middle of the 18th century even, have started to question whether this was in fact by Paul. Here's another thing about it. So it's not by Paul, but it could very well have been by one of his students or a follower trying to imitate Paul. Why? Because it would give them credibility. So the fact that it was from Paul would somehow give it credibility. Plus, by the way, it's not necessarily to the Ephesians. Apparently the oldest source of this letter leaves that spot blank. It doesn't say Ephesians. It just was assumed to have been sent to the Ephesians because then suddenly it started appearing as Ephesians, so we thought it was. Obviously, somebody who was credible said it's a letter to the Ephesians. Ephesus, by the way, was a city on the Mediterranean in what is now modern-day Turkey. So long way away is the thing, right? So letter to the Ephesians. The other thing that's interesting about it is that we lump it in with all of Paul's letters traditionally, but Paul's letters are invariably written as a response. Right? If you think the ones that we often know the best, like Corinthians or Romans, you can see in how Paul is writing that he is clearly responding to either somebody sending him a letter or some sort of communication that there's something going on and they want him to talk to them about it. Like since he was there and established the church, in Corinth, for instance, it's particularly obvious that he is responding to someone communicating to him that stuff's going bad, tell us how to fix it. And that's not what happens in this letter. This letter is clearly not written as a response. It is clearly written as here's important things you need to know about being a community. So did that passage that I just read lose any of its credibility because I just told you it wasn't by Paul and it's not actually to Ephesians? And if it didn't, why not? Is it because I'm telling you that? I could have just made all of that up. I didn't, just so you know. But I could have, and you might have believed me. Maybe we still give it some credibility because it is included in this thing that we call the Bible, and I have a copy of it right there. So I obviously must have read it exactly correctly the way it's... Again, here's the thing. Being discerning about what you hear is required. It's not just a question of you should believe it because I read it from a book or a letter by so-and-so or because I said it. Be discerning about it. And there's a big difference between being discerning and, what do you know? You're just so-and-so. Here's Jesus once again, by the way, because we've heard this happen before just recently. Jesus, remember the story of Jesus preaching in the synagogue and in his hometown. And he says some things, and they're all amazed. But that amazement very quickly turns to, who do you think you are? We know who you are. You're just like the carpenter's son from down the street. Well, here we are again with, you can't be from heaven. You're the son of Mary and Joseph. We don't believe you. So suddenly everything Jesus says is suspect. Is it? Or do you think some of those people who questioned his credibility were able to look past that and go, well, wait a minute, let's just think about what he's saying here, though? Because that's absolutely necessary in the case of this letter to the Ephesians. It's absolutely necessary in the case of anything you read in the newspaper. That's the thing that folds out. Okay. How are you feeling about them now? But do you get the sense that I've kind of implied that, they don't know what a newspaper is, so why would they know what I'm talking about? See how easy it is to do that. It's easy. It's easy to do that. What's not easy is everything that the writer of that letter, whoever it's to, and by the way, it's to everybody, is trying to say we need to do. It's way easier than that. Be honest to your neighbor, but in a way that is uplifting and inspiring to them. That's hard, because sometimes they don't want to hear it, especially if they live across the back alley from you, say. Sometimes, but also sometimes we don't say it in an uplifting manner, do we? We don't. Sometimes we say it in a way that appears to be overtly critical and embarrassing in a public forum, like, say, if you send a tweet that questions the human rights record of another country, and that country goes ballistic on you because how dare you say that? And by the way, you might want to check your own record too. But see how easy it is also to not only question the credibility of it, but also to then turn it on the other party. It's easy to do that. And see, I, for one, think that one of the great things about Canada is that we do actually raise issues of human rights with other countries. And no, we're not absolutely perfect at it. In fact, we are really crappy at it in many ways, and have been historically. But we should try and do something about that. But that shouldn't stop us from saying something, if we're sincere about it. Because that's being a good neighbor. Thieves shouldn't steal. There's a good one right now. Because every day, especially in rural Alberta, you see stories of people losing things because they didn't lose it, someone took it. Why? I remember just recently we had in Bashaw, there was a community meeting about a mental health initiative, which, by the way, is in place and going really good, and also talking about rural crime. And one of the things that the superintendent of Central Alberta said was that there's three kinds of people that they deal with. One is an actual criminal. They're doing it because they're just interested in taking your stuff. The other is somebody who has mental health issues that cause them to act out in a certain way, and that person is not a criminal. And the third is somebody who's just desperate. They could have lost their job, they had no money, and they were just really desperate. That person is not a criminal either. Two of those three groups need your help first and foremost. And discerning which of those three is really hard. So be patient when they're trying to do that. But see, again, it's about discerning what's true in that situation. All of the things that the writer of this letter talks about are all framed as a two-part thing. They're all framed the same way. It's important to be honest and true to your neighbor in a way that's uplifting and positive. Show them love. Why? Because they're your neighbor. And it creates community. That's what this whole letter is about. It's about what the church is supposed to be, a community. And in order to create community, You need to be honest in a way that's uplifting and inspiring. You need to ensure that people aren't stealing because they have work to do. Why do they have work to do? Because then they have something to share with others. Again, we're building community. It's about how we relate to each other. I know what you're thinking. That's easy. We can do that all the time. It's not easy, and we should do it all the time, but we don't. And that's part of the problem. It's not easy, but we should be trying to do it all the time. There are all sorts of reasons why we might not. But that's not the point just yet. See, when I don't know about you, but when I read the newspaper, and then I try and figure out, like, I'll read. I think it's important to have information, so I read the stories that even you don't want to read. To be fair, Lori likes to read the stories about how a cat saved a family from a fire. Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, how ridiculous. But no, again, it's important to, even if it means you need to read something you really don't want to read, as horrifying and horrible as it is, or something that just makes you want to go, oh man. There was another shooting. 2 police officers lost their lives, and 2 citizens lost their lives. 4 people lost their lives, and still, a few days later, the police don't know why. They have no idea why the person did it yet. They're trying to figure it out, but they don't know why yet. Doesn't that just make you go, I don't even have actually words for how that would describe how it makes you feel, right? I don't want you to think, by the way, I don't want you to think that I'm the world's going to hell in a handbasket kind of minister. You know, those ones that kind of go, the world's going to hell in a handbasket, but if you do what I say, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. How often does Jesus say, don't be afraid? Because it's not about, from the very beginning, I know I say it a lot, and I'm going to say it again and again and again and again, but bad, evil, whatever you want to call that, that's the opposite of good, is not our default setting. We learn it. Our default setting is good. If you believe we are created in the image of God, however you know God, whether that's the Creator, the love that connects us, that sort of universal higher power, however you know God, if we are created in the image of God, think about what that means. Because it means you'll be honest with your neighbor in a way that's uplifting. It means that you will help people and care for them because they are part of your community, the community which is all of God's children. It means you will love because God is love, and to be created in the image of God, we would love. We've learned how not to. We've learned how not to. But again, it's kind of the point of Jesus, is to teach us otherwise, to teach us something different. And I think far too often that's where we stop. Jesus teaches us something different. What Jesus teaches us is how to reconnect with the idea that we are created in the image of God. That's what the writer of this letter means when he says, be imitators, therefore, of God. It doesn't stop there, but he goes on to say, be imitators, therefore, of God as children of God. How do children learn? Because we put them in rows in a schoolroom and give them a book and then teach them words? They learn because you show them, don't they? They don't learn from what you tell them. They learn from the example that you, as a parent or as an adult, set for them. It's how they learn. They're imitating you. But they're not just imitating you. They're connecting with the you that's part of them. And that's the point here. is this person, whoever this is, doesn't matter. Whoever they're writing to, doesn't matter, because it's to everybody. They're reminding us that we are created in the image of God. And if we can connect with that, in fact, that's the point of Jesus. Jesus isn't just our example to follow. Jesus is the thing that connects us with what's already in us to live out that love. That's being created in the image of God. It's not easy because we've learned how not to. We've learned a way to get away from it. We've learned that it's so much easier. Again, going back to the question of when did we learn that it was okay to lie and to steal and all that, pretty early on, don't you think? I mean, think about the biblical stories of how we learned. We learned, how did Adam and Eve leave the garden? They did something wrong, is what we learned. Okay. In fact, we are inheritors of that, and so we are inheritors of original sin. Oh, so what you're saying is that we're already bad. Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. But if you listen to what I tell you, I can help you, not go to hell. We learned it. We learned it. If I can make you afraid and tell you who's to blame for your fear and how I can save you from that, I have power over you. But if you can discern the truth, what's actually true, who has the power? Just right at the moment, I don't know if you remember it, it's long before your time, but He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, he takes the sword, I have the power, remember that He-Man? Okay. It's back on. Awesome. Okay. We're all about power, is the thing. We're all about power. And there are so many different ways I could have power over you. One of those ways is to make you afraid and then tell you I can save you from that fear. That gives me all the power. What does Jesus say, though? Does Jesus say, hey, I can save you from your fear? Of course not. He just says, don't be afraid. It's up to you to do it. I can't make you, says Jesus. I can steer you in the right direction. I'm trying really hard to not say save you, because that's the language we use. But think about even that language that we use, that Jesus saves you. Someone else is doing it for you, and Jesus isn't about that. Jesus is about how we do it together. The writer of this letter to the Ephesians, same thing. We do it together. We do it as a community. That's being true to the image of God that's in us. That's being the imitator of God that this person describes.